right. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, uh, we're going to try something a little different. We're going to put on those blue suede shoes, and explore the king, Elvis Presley.
The king.
But
Yeah.
but hold on to your hats, folks, because we're not talking about the hits or those hip shakes.
Right.
No, this deep dive is all about Elvis the Seeker.
Yeah.
The man who spent his whole life searching for something way bigger than himself.
Absolutely.
And it turns out that journey took him down some seriously fascinating spiritual paths. I'm really excited to get into this one.
Yeah, it's interesting how his public image, the king of rock and roll, often kind of overshadows this whole profound spiritual side to Elvis.
Totally. You hit the nail on the head. It's like we've got biographies, interviews. We even found accounts from some of the folks in his inner circle, and they all point to this deep fascination that he had with mysticism, occult, and even UFOs.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too because this wasn't just like a superficial interest for him,
Right.
It really seems like these beliefs were really deeply connected and intertwined with his music, with all his relationships, and even with all his struggles, his personal struggles.
It's funny you say that because I think some folks out there, they might hear Elvis and the occult and think, wait a minute, are we diving into some sensationalized tabloid stuff here? But that's not what this is about. This is about, really understanding the man, not the myth, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And to really understand, I think, the roots of his spiritual searching, I think we need to go back to Elvis's childhood.
Okay.
Back to Tupelo, Mississippi, and think about the poverty. I mean, think extreme poverty, like something you'd see in North Korea, today.
Right.
I mean, try to really imagine the kind of impact that environment has on a young, developing mind.
It's hard to even fathom, right? And then on top of that, you have the story of Elvis's stillborn twin brother,
Right.
Jesse. So Elvis enters the world just 35 minutes after his twin passes away, and they were so poor that they couldn't even afford a doctor, a hospital.
That's heavy stuff.
Really heavy stuff. And it makes you wonder,
Well, there's this concept called epigenetic trauma, and it suggests that this kind of intense hardship, like what Elvis experienced, can actually like leave a mark, almost like a footprint on a person's genes.
Wow.
And impacting not just their physical health, which we kind of think about, but also their mental, their emotional well-being too.
I mean, I'm already seeing a possible connection here,
Yeah.
Could that kind of early trauma, combined with the loss of his twin, could that have sort of fueled Elvis's deep need to find meaning and purpose, to find the answers to life's bigger questions, almost like he was searching for something to kind of fill that void from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's a really compelling theory, and actually researchers who study what they call twinless survivors, they found that they often carry around this really profound sense of guilt, this feeling of incompleteness, and really this deep longing to understand, why they survived when their twin didn't.
So then that could mean that Elvis was wrestling with some pretty heavy existential questions from a really young age. I mean, is it a stretch to think that this loss and coupled with the extreme poverty, is it a stretch to think that really impacted the entire trajectory of his life?
It's hard to say for sure, but the possibility is definitely there. And then of course we can't forget the influence, the powerful influence of Elvis's mother, Gladys.
Right, Gladys.
Yeah.
The sources really paint her as incredibly devoted and just fiercely protective of Elvis, especially after losing Jesse. But I have to admit, some of what I read kind of suggests that her love, I don't know, maybe veered into overprotective territory.
Yeah, there's actually a term for this. It's called lethal enmeshment.
Okay.
And it's where a parent's love and control, they kind of become so intertwined, so enmeshed that that it actually hinders the child's emotional development, and it can create adults who are mature in some ways,
Right.
but also deeply dependent and prone to, irresponsible behavior.
And that push and pull,
Mm-hmm.
That mix of responsibility and recklessness that definitely seems to kind of show up in Elvis's life later on.
Mm.
But here's where things get really interesting. Gladys herself, she had this mystical side. Like she reportedly saw shadow people, had premonitions. And get this, she took a pregnant Elvis and Jessie
Wow.
to these incredibly intense Pentecostal church services every single night.
Oh, wow. Imagine that sensory overload,
Oh, yeah.
for a baby in the womb. I mean, the music, the chanting, just the emotion, the raw emotional intensity of those services. It's not hard to imagine those experiences leaving a pretty lasting imprint on Elvis,
Yeah.
really kind of shaping him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes you wonder, like, what kind of impact did that even have on him musically, Because these Pentecostal preachers, they were known for kind of blending that gospel music with this really raw passion and this spiritual fire almost.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where Elvis get his performance energy, even his signature moves.
It's a really intriguing thought, and it speaks to this idea that Elvis's spiritual journey was kind of woven into the fabric of his being, starting even before he was even born. But then as he got older, his quest for meaning, it really kind of expanded beyond the church walls.
Oh, yeah. And that's where we start to see Elvis the bookworm kind of emerge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't just like casual reading. I mean,
Right.
he really devoured books on everything. I mean, everything from the occult, Eastern religions,
Wow.
to numerology, and believe it or not, UFOs.
I think it's important to remember kind of the context of the time here,
Okay.
because in the 50s and 60s, there was this growing cultural fascination with kind of like alternative spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
Like beatniks, Eastern mysticism, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And Elvis, always pushing boundaries, he was right there in the thick of it.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, solitary reading either. In 1964, he meets his hairdresser,
Okay.
Larry Geller. And it turns out Geller's just as into mysticism as Elvis is.
Oh.
So they'd spend hours, talking, debating, exploring all these esoteric ideas. It's like Geller basically becomes Elvis's spiritual guru at this point, kind of guiding him, even deeper into this world.
And Geller introduced Elvis to a whole range of different practices. I mean, from meditation all the way to something called Christ consciousness.
That's Christ consciousness. What is that?
Yeah, this idea that anyone, regardless of their religion, could kind of tap into the same divine awareness as Jesus.
Okay, so we've got Elvis the Seeker here,
Yeah.
right? Soaking up all this knowledge. But I'm curious, did it go beyond, just reading and talking about it?
Mm.
Did he put any of these beliefs into practice?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, he incorporated meditation into his daily routine, and he reportedly even delved into ceremonial magic, even something called sex magic, which basically aimed to harness sexual energy for spiritual growth.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to read about these mystical ideas, but it's a whole other thing to actually practice them. It shows how deeply committed he was to this search.
Exactly. Yeah. And speaking of commitment, let's talk about Elvis's fascination with UFOs.
Okay, let's do it.
Now, some people might dismiss this as, tabloid fodder, but there are actually multiple witnessed accounts of Elvis's UFO encounters from people he trusted, people in his inner circle.
Okay, all right. Color me intrigued.
Yeah.
What kind of encounters are we talking about here? I mean, are we talking fleeting glimpses or something a little bit more substantial?
These weren't just, quick sightings. We're talking prolonged encounters with strange lights in the sky.
Ah.
Even unusual occurrences afterwards. One particularly vivid incident happened at Elvis's Bel Air mansion.
Okay.
He and his bodyguard, they were outside one night, and this silent, intensely bright light appeared overhead. And get this, after the light vanished,
Yeah.
Elvis briefly disappeared too.
Wait, hold on. He vanished?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Like, poof. Gone.
They found him a little while later
Okay.
in a neighbor's yard.
Oh, wow.
Appearing disoriented, almost as if he'd been observing the departing craft from a closer vantage point.
That is incredibly strange.
Yeah, it's a story that's been corroborated by multiple people who were there that night.
And it wasn't just, isolated incidents either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't Elvis have like a whole theory about UFOs and their role in human history? I'm remembering something about a book he was really into. But
yeah, you're thinking of Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods.
That's it, Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah, and this book put forward this idea that ancient myths and archaeological sites could actually be evidence of alien contact. And Elvis was completely captivated by it.
He believed that aliens were not only visiting Earth, but they were also telepathically communicating with us, maybe even intervening to prevent nuclear war.
Right.
It wasn't just, seeing these UFOs. It was like he was weaving it into this whole cosmic narrative.
And this brings us to kind of an interesting question.
Okay.
What kind of archetype does Elvis truly represent? Is he simply the king? Is he the icon of rock and roll, or is there something more complex at play here? Something that speaks to this really deep-seated need to connect with the unknown.
I mean, it's like he was constantly pushing boundaries, right? Not just in his music, but in his spiritual explorations too. He wasn't content with the status quo.
Yeah.
He was always searching for more, always reaching for something just beyond his grasp.
And it makes you think about those who achieve that extraordinary fame and success. Do they ever feel truly satisfied, or is there always this lingering sense of something missing, something more to discover? It's almost like a tragic element to the archetype.
It's funny you mention that because Miguel Conner, the author of the Occult Elvis, he actually argues that Elvis fits the archetype of the trickster more than the king.
The trickster. Now that's an interesting take. Explain that a little further. What makes Elvis a trickster in Conner's view?
Well, Conner, he points out how Elvis, he broke down all those barriers, challenged those conventions, and really brought about massive, massive cultural change. He fused those black and white musical influences, challenged all those traditional views on sexuality, and basically he just shook up that status quo.
And that definitely fits the trickster's role, as a disruptor, like a catalyst for change. But there's often kind of a shadow side to the trickster, right? Kind of a destructive element that comes with their chaotic energy.
And you definitely see that in Elvis's life too. The struggles with addiction, the tumultuous relationships, just the sheer pressure of fame that ultimately led to his early death. It's like he was both a revolutionary and a cautionary tale.
Exactly, yeah. And Conner also draws a parallel to the shaman archetype. Think about it,
Yeah.
Elvis, he brought gifts, his music, his charisma to the tribe, his audience, right? But he also suffered greatly under the weight of his role, like a shaman carrying the burdens of his people.
It's such a powerful image, this idea that Elvis was kind of channeling something beyond himself, something really potent, transformative, but ultimately paying a heavy price for it. But here's the thing that really struck me. We've talked a lot about Elvis's deep spiritual searching, but what about his personal relationships? Did those beliefs kind of affect how he interacted with others, especially women?
That's a great question, and it is really interesting because even as Elvis was exploring these really expansive spiritual concepts, he seemed to also be struggling with some very human, very earthly issues, especially when it came to love and intimacy.
And remember how we were talking about Gladys's overprotective nature and the idea of lethal enmeshment?
Yeah.
Well, according to some of these sources, Elvis he reportedly couldn't be intimate with women who had children.
Wow, that's a really fascinating detail. It almost suggests that his unresolved issues with Gladys, that they created this almost like a subconscious taboo around motherhood, like it was too close to home, too reminiscent of that really intense, complicated dynamic that they shared.
And get this, he was often drawn to women who physically resembled Gladys. Priscilla, for example, or even Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. Elvis, he saw a picture of Blavatsky in a book, and he was just immediately captivated.
It's like he was subconsciously trying to recreate that mother-son bond,
Yeah.
but in a way that was ultimately unsustainable, maybe even destined to fail.
It really adds a whole other layer to his story, doesn't it? This idea that even as he was exploring these profound spiritual paths, he was still grappling with these really deep-seated psychological wounds.
It really highlights how intertwined our spiritual and emotional lives are. You know, you can be seeking enlightenment, you can be exploring the mysteries of the universe, but those personal demons, they can still find a way to hold you back.
So after, diving deep into these sources, what's the biggest takeaway for you? What's the one thing that really stands out about Elvis's spiritual journey?
I think for me, it's the realization that Elvis was just far, far more complex than the image that we often see. He wasn't just this charismatic performer. He was a man who was wrestling with these really profound questions about life, about death, about the nature of reality. He was a seeker. He was a rebel. He was a contradiction. Yeah. He embraced both the light and the shadow within himself.
And maybe that's why he continues to fascinate us, right? Because he represents something both familiar and deeply mysterious at the same time. He was the king, he was the trickster, he was the shaman, and perhaps on some level he still is. There's this persistent phenomenon of Elvis sightings.
Yeah.
People claiming to see him in dreams or near-death experiences, or even just out about in the world.
Yeah, it's almost as if his presence lingers. Like he tapped into something beyond just the material world, something that transcends time and space.
It makes you wonder if in a sense Elvis kind of achieved a form of immortality, not in a literal sense, of course, but in the collective consciousness, in the realm of myth and legend.
It's a fascinating thought, and that's something I'll leave you to ponder. Did Elvis truly find what he was searching for? Does his presence still resonate with us in ways that we can't fully comprehend? We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the king's fascinating and often hidden spiritual journey.
And as always, we encourage you to explore the sources for yourself. Yeah. See what resonates with you, what sparks your curiosity. That's what the deep dive is all about, encouraging deeper exploration and understanding. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep jiving deep.